How should Seahawks fans feel about a new look linebacker group heading into the 2024 season? We're going to find out from somebody who knows a thing or two about linebackers here on our Wednesday edition of Locked On Seahawks.
You are Locked On Seahawks, your daily Seattle Seahawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings, 12. This is Corbin Smith, host of the Locked On Seahawks podcast, your daily Seahawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Glad to be joined, as always, by my co-host in crime, Rob Rang, and a special thanks to all the 12s out there, whether you're listening in nearby West Seattle or over across the country in Boston, Massachusetts. We really appreciate each and every one of you for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. And it looked like we got our guest excited with that shout out. We've got a lot of Boston listeners, so there's some Patriot traders that really like the Seahawks. So we are fired up to bring Lofa Tatupu back onto the Locked On Seahawks podcast, one of 4 off-ball linebackers in Seahawks history to be a first-team All-Pro selection, led the team 4 straight years in tackles, and even showed this weekend that he can play a little bit of basketball.
Fellas, how you doing, man? I appreciate you having me. Yeah, well, I feel like everybody's true love was basketball. At 5'11", I just didn't see a spot for me out there. Lockdown defender, but if you don't have handles, you're in trouble.
Yeah, you mentioned the 5'11". I got to say this, and maybe I'm the only one that thinks this is funny, but looking at the picture from this weekend, if you had the headband now, I'm thinking this is the second coming of Mike Bibby here in the Champions of Change game.
I like that comparison, but okay, let's just take it back a step. One of us was a middle linebacker, allegedly supposed to be the baddest dude on the field. The other was a defensive end with 74 sacks. You guys probably have the stats on that. And 30 forced fumbles, Cliff Averill. The giant on the right, Brandon Marshall, 6'5", 230. That was a receiver when I was playing. And I'll never forget. I even told Brandon, I was like, dude, I'll never forget when you took 170 to the house on us. Sunday Night Football 2006 in Denver. And he was like, it was actually 77. I was like, who's counting? Who's counting?
Well, and who's counting on the Richter scale? I think when I see Brandon Marshall, my goodness, I mean, what a just massive human being he is. To your point, Loaf, I mean, the middle linebacker, defensive end, and you and Cliff Averill staying right next to Brandon Marshall, and yet he is the biggest man on the court and looks good doing it. Looks like he could still catch touchdowns now. I mean, there's only so many players that I would basically just say, okay, look, these are guys who are just, I hate using the word freakish, but are so big, so strong, so fast.
You're right.
And Brandon Marshall is absolutely among them.
So what? Because, first of all, I think Brandon, 06 was his rookie year, so he's only a year after me. So he's probably 39 or 40, right? But he stopped playing in 17 or whatever. So all the guys that know him from, because I was coaching in 15 and 16 with the Hawks, and one of the greatest battles I've ever seen, it was Clash of the Titans. We were playing the Jets, I think it was 16, in New York, and it was Sherm and Marshall head-to-head. It was a heavyweight championship bout. I think Marshall had 125 yards and a touchdown, could have had 2. Sherm had, I think he had 2 interceptions, could have had 3, but it was just back and forth and back and forth. And so luckily I was on personnel and I'm watching through binoculars. After I sent in the personnel to Chris Richard, I just went right over to watch the real game, the matchup within the matchup. And these two, they both had spectacular games, unbelievable players in their own right. And his numbers are insane, but a lot of the kids, and I tried to tell them, I say kids respectfully, just like you said, freakish respectfully. A lot of kids don't know that Brandon Marshall was lightning quick and fast, straight line speed. And so when he took that catch, I think it was Cutler's first start, he threw him a slant and he went 77 yards. I went back to the sideline. I was like, yo, I don't know who this guy is. I go, but 6'5", 230 is not supposed to move like that. And it turned out I was right. Freak of nature, like you said, Rob, it's just unbelievable talent.
It's crazy seeing all of the former players, former Seahawks, and just general former athletes that were out there for that event that has really become a staple in the Seattle community in the summer, and obviously draws a ton of fans for a good cause. But we are so excited to have you on here. This is our second part of a training camp series that we're doing. We're doing things a little bit differently this year to let our guests have kind of some input on what we're diving into. And of course, with your background being the former all-pro linebacker that you are, this is the position that fans seem to be the most concerned about. And so we're going to start kind of big picture here, and then we'll dive into some more specifics. But essentially, should Seahawk fans be concerned about this linebacker group going into 2024? Because there's no Bobby Wagner, there's no Jordan Brooks, Devin Bush is gone. I mean, this is a completely retooled group. The two veterans you signed, Dodson and Baker, missed the entire offseason program. Tyrice Knight's a fourth-round pick. I mean, there's just a lot of questions from fans. Do you think that concern is warranted?
Not at all. Not at all with the D-line and what we've added in the trenches. And that's where it all starts. But, fellas, as long as you got the monsters up front, and we do, and then Adam Murphy, like, I didn't think he'd be there when we took him. I thought he was top 10, but the run on quarterbacks allowed us to be, him to be there for us. So that was a blessing, and he's a special player. So I can't wait to watch him get to work. And all we needed was just a little D-line. Even last year, we need a little D-line depth. That's all we needed. So we got that. And then these guys, if you're a fan of football, you're well aware of who Baker is. And, like, he makes plays in every facet of the game. Coverage, tackles for loss, sacks, interceptions. It's impressive. And then same with Dodson. Like, he finally got to start like some meaningful time, 10 or 11 games last year. But he is every bit the athlete and the physical force that you want in linebackers. Both these guys, they play at a different speed. And I feel like that's probably what McDonald and then with John, they got together, talked about their philosophy, but they watched the film and then they saw two guys moving at a different pace, just passing people up to make tackles for loss, stops at the line of scrimmage, and then physical. The craziest thing about Baker, it feels like it's so effortless with his power. Like he's not a big guy, maybe 230, but I saw him, throw linemen and then take on the running back and not give ground. So having stopping power is everything. That's usually one of the first things I want to see out of a linebacker. Both these guys got it.
Well, and that's great praise from you, Lofa. Of course, you played the position as well as anybody has in Seattle. And, I want to kind of, because of your perspective at the linebacker position, of course, that's why we have you here joining us. But I also am very curious about your perspective on Pete Carroll. Now, I understand that, Seahawks fans out there are more excited about the future than they are respectful about the past with Pete Carroll. But still, your experience as being a player under Pete Carroll at USC, obviously a player under him with the Seahawks, and then a linebacker coach with him, as you mentioned, 2015, 2016 with the Seahawks. Can you just kind of, take a greater approach or a greater perspective on Pete Carroll as a coach, just as a man, now that he is no longer the Seahawks head coach?
One of the greatest competitors I've ever met. And I don't think enough people talk about that. You just go back. I talk about this all the time. You watch him win a coin toss. The guy's going nuts. Like Tiger Woods, fist pumping. Like he just made the putt to win the Masters. And it's the pure just competition aspect that he loved. And that's something that I always had kind of naturally and gravitated towards. But he spurned on a more love for it in terms of like, well, you don't have to lose any rep. And I was like, you're right. I don't. Like, I bought into it. When the players buy in, it's special, right? And that's what it is. It's about being a leader of men. And so I'm excited to see what McDonald could do, but because he's proven everywhere he's went, they've gotten better. And that's really the measuring stick. So, but with Pete, I think that whole competition aspect, it's just something that, when I came here as a linebacker coach, it was probably the first time I was apprehensive or scared. I was just like, okay, well, Bobby's been to a Pro Bowl. KJ's on the cusp of Pro Bowls. Don't mess it up because Pete, but also, yeah, right? Also Ken Norton, did a phenomenal job with these guys. And I did play under Ken Norton, one of the best coaches to ever instill confidence. And that's really what we're talking about. Confidence is everything in life, not just sports. And Ken Norton was one of the greatest to do that. But, that's really what I took for them. And I just tried to I didn't get enough time with Ken. He coached when he was an assistant linebacker coach when I was at SC. And then he was the head linebacker coach when I was there, but I was my last year and my body was already falling apart. And honestly, if Ken Norton wasn't there, I wouldn't have made it through that season. I don't think I had enough in me left to say I can do this, but it just took one look or one talk from Ken. He was a true leader. He knew what to say and what buttons to push. Like, hey, you got this, or I just need this out of you. And man, I'm forever grateful for both of those men, Pete Carroll and Ken Norton.
We're chatting with former All-Pro linebacker Lofa Tatupu here on our Wednesday edition of Locked On Seahawks. And we're going to go from one legend to another that, unfortunately, I mean, it's gut-wrenching enough that Bobby Wagner, a couple years ago, the Seahawks had to make the move to get rid of him because they were dealing with their salary cap issues, and he had a bloated salary in their minds. And here we are a couple years later, and they had to unceremoniously let him go again after he had a really good season last year and was a second-team All-Pro in spite of some of the issues in front of him. You had the opportunity to work with Bobby Wagner as a coach. You've gotten to watch him on the field, one of the best linebackers ever to play the game. But what is number 54's legacy in your mind? And assuming that he's not going to play in Seattle, at this point, I'm never going to say never after what happened last year, but assuming that he's done in Seattle and he's going to finish his career not playing another game for the Seahawks, what is his legacy in your mind?
First ballot Hall of Fame, best to ever play linebacker in the Seahawks uniform. I mean, I could go on and on. Unbelievable pillar in the community. Even more important, it's literally one of the greatest stories of legends I've ever seen, and it's just an honor to actually get a chance to coach him, or even say I coached him. I don't know how much coaching I did. I was like, Bobby, go get the ball, and he got the ball. But yeah, it's a true champion, and just a path that I was grateful in life to be a part of and cross paths with, because man, Bobby's incredible human being, one of the greatest leaders I ever been around. And I think, even Ken Norton probably had a part to do with that. Just he always knew the right things to say. And that's kind of something I learned from Nort, was just you knew when to pick people up or when you had to get on somebody. And his leadership style was just unrelenting positivity, which probably got from Pete, right? And so just probably one of the best students I ever seen in terms of open-minded, very quiet, very calculated, but unbelievable talent, and Hall of Fame person.
Well, and that's great to hear about Bobby Wagner as not only the player, but as the person as well. I'm curious. I'm going to ask you to put your kind of scouting lens on here for a moment, Lofa, and kind of move towards the future here. The Seahawks made the selection of Tyrice Knight in the 4th round out of UTEP, and there were some out there in the draft community who thought that it was a bit of a reach. It's something that you remember a little bit, because there was a lot of people who were critical when the Seahawks selected you in the 2nd round. I'm just curious about your thoughts on Tyrice Knight. I mean, this is a guy that, wasn't the celebrated player. I mean, you, of course, played at USC to wrap up your career. Originally started at Maine. I mean, this young man was a community college guy and winds up going to UTEP. I mean, Texas El Paso, it's more known for, basketball players like yourself and Tim Hardaway at UTEP rather than, fearsome linebackers. We just talked about Bobby Wagner, of course, who played at Utah State. I mean, can you just talk about the idea of a linebacker that maybe cut his teeth at a smaller, lower level? What is he facing in his jump to the NFL here? And what did you think about Tyrice Knight based on what you saw?
I don't think he's facing much in terms of the jump to the next level. He's battle tested. He went through the fire. His numbers and his production speak for itself. He's a well-rounded. He's the kind of guys I love, unheralded. You never saw them coming, and then years later, he made a couple Pro Bowls. I always knew. It's no, nobody knew. But so I'm speaking about Tyrese the way a guy named Rob Rang spoke about me. When they traded 2 fourths and a second, I remember only one guy had my back, and it was Rob Rang. He said, I know everybody's questioning this pick. It may be a little early. He's like, but not too early. I wouldn't risk the chance of losing him. I promise you, the stadium will be filled with 51 jerseys. And I remember that very, vividly in my mind. And so I'm going to say the same for this kid. He went through the fire, and that's adversity. That's part of the scouting process. What's he gone through adversity-wise through his life in terms of everybody telling him, you can't do this, you can't do this. But then you show up and you do it, and at a very high level. He's done it at a very high level, whether it was community college, go to UTEP, all conference there, led the entire nation in solo tackles. I think it was 85, 140 combined. Tackles for loss, interception, sacks. He is well-rounded, and this is kind of falls in line with Dodson and Baker. There's nothing they can't do. And, when you have no weakness, that's stronger than having, one unbelievable, strength. And so I try to talk to all these kids in high school and college, just work on your weaknesses and get well-rounded so that there's nothing they can use against you. I'm excited to see what he becomes, but I know he's got that dog in him. And so he's going to be just fine. Just trust me. Just let him learn and continue to develop. I think a lot of people are going to be upset when they said, oh, it was a reach.
Looking at his skill set, he's played off-ball linebacker, and he's also they've worked him off the edge quite a bit at UTEP earlier in his career. So he's done a little bit of everything. The Seahawks are starting him at the weak side linebacker spot. Where do you see his trajectory in this Seahawks defense long-term? And you mentioned you don't think it's a big leap. Do you think this is a kid that could potentially play some defensive snaps as a rookie? Because I think there's a lot of draft analysts out there that we're like, hey, this kid's going to need a redshirt year. But with the numbers he put up, that seems a little bit crazy to me.
Hey, and that's what production will always win, right? And if they made plays there, when they get to the next level, they're going to make plays in the next level. It's perspective. And that's something that's very I've heard some very notable coaches out there, and I don't want to, shoot them down. They said you can't teach that. Well, this is coaching, and we'll get to that on another podcast. But, perspective is the hardest to teach. If a kid has that perspective of making plays, he's got the intuition, the instinct. You can only incrementally give him a different vantage point of what they see and what to focus on. But some just have it innately. And, eyes, hands, feet, leverage. Those are tangible skills that everyone can teach, regardless of if they have the perspective. But he's got the perspective. If I were to nitpick, because the only thing I saw was leaving his feet just a step too early. But he's still and this is high praise, Bobby Wagner, when he left his feet, no one got away from him. And even at the NFL level, I didn't see many people in the 13, 14 years Bobby's been playing that he had his grips on leave him. I didn't see that with this kid. However, these running backs, and then this is where competition will come into play and people will downgrade as a conference USA or whatever UTEP was in. But just the running backs, they're a different beast at the next level. If he takes one more step than he thinks is necessary, and that's an easy fix because he's a willing hitter. But if you don't have that willingness in you, then it's a hard fix. And so, but instinctively, I don't see him over aggressive, even with all those tackles for loss. I don't see him misstepping and jumping play action. It's wild. He's got it.
Well, it's interesting that you said that he's got it, because I am just curious if there's any players that are still in veteran free agency that you think at this point in their careers Lofa also have. This would be my last question. I mean, the Seahawks create a little bit of salary cap space for them, and as Corbin had mentioned before with Tyrel, Dodson, Jerome, Baker, coming off of the injuries, that there's the possibility of Seattle goes all the way through training camp, and basically they're looking at the Tyrice Knight or John Radigan, Patrick O'Connell. There's three big names, it feels like, in veteran free agency. I'm just curious if you have any favorites among them. Shaq Leonard Zach Cunningham, and Quan Alexander. Do any one of those three really just kind of light your fire, and you think that would be a good fit for the Seahawks specifically?
Man, I love watching all of those guys play. And it's I know it's wild to think that those guys are free agents right now, but where they're at in their career, injury history has to play a factor. I don't know if I recall Zach actually being injured much, because Zach's one of these underappreciated guys. Everywhere he goes, he just racks up 130 tackles, sacks, interceptions, like just makes plays. And so I think that would probably be the best fit, especially for what Mike likes to do. Shaq is a special talent as long as he's healthy, and that's been the big issue, and which led to his release. And you put up his numbers with anybody, I mean, he might even be there with Hall of Fame numbers in the 7-8 years he played. And then Quan, always loved. Quan is a savage. Unfortunately for Quan, he's been about as healthy as me. And that's just the name of the game, is, not just, ability, but availability. And so, but every time Quan was healthy enough to go, he was knocking people out. And man, I love watching all those guys play. I would say Cunningham was probably the one you could plug in right away and not worry too much about injury or availability in terms of how many, do we have to put him on a pitch count and or no practice to make sure he's ready for Sunday. I think Zach walk in and play right away.
We really appreciate having you on, Lofa, as always. And I'm going to cap off, and maybe this is a question that's putting you a little bit on the spot here. And I'm not looking to make you feel old here. I mean, this comes from a guy that I realize one of my favorite songs is 25 years old today, and I'm just like, where has my life gone? But anyway, the linebacker position, with how things have changed since you last suited up and just the way that the NFL has changed, how have you seen that linebacker spot evolve over the last 10 years or so? And what coaches are asking players to do at that spot, maybe how they prioritize different things compared to when you were playing in the mid-2000s?
Yeah, I was born 15 years too early because everybody told me I was too light, too small. I would have been a heavy linebacker at 237 these days. Did, right? Rob here, yeah. So when I was helping out, Pete had me come in to consult, Pete and John, Pete's last year, 2023, and I was looking at some of these linebackers. I was like, they were like, yeah, he's one of the bigger guys. I was like, 230 is one of the bigger guys. But again, the 40 times are like 4.6 and faster. Back then, if you ran a 4.6, you were blazing. But again, body types were bigger. Well, everybody but me. So it's become a more spread out. I would have loved to play in today's game and just one back. They barely anybody uses a fullback. I would have just shooting gaps, 100 plus tackles for loss. But I can't imagine how many more interceptions I would have had if I got to just play pass all day. Yeah, wait, Corbin. 25 years ago, let's take it back to what you just started with. What was your favorite song?
I'm a hard rock guy, so I was listening to a Seven Dust album, and I realized, oh my God, this album is 25 years old. 1999. I'm like, God, I was 10 then, but I'm like, God, now I'm an old man. Where has time gone?
That's amazing. That's amazing, brother.
Lofa, as always, man, we appreciate it. Before we let you go, we're doing this with every one of our guests. You seem like you're more on the optimistic side with where the Seahawks are going, at least in the linebacker spot. How many games is this football team winning this year one for Mike Macdonald?
Man, year one, first-time head coach, it's a tough ask. But I just believe with the talent and just with what he demands and what I hear from him, even just listening to him, when he does his interviews, I'm just like, yeah, let's go. I got to believe those players are buying in too. So I'm going to go 10-7.
Well, that would be a step forward from 9-8. Everybody keeps mentioning 9 wins, and it feels like a Jeff Fisher-like cycle. But maybe Mike Macdonald can break that in and get them to 10 victories.
Okay, wait. Well, I got a question. Look around the NFC West. Who are you looking at as our competition?
Well, I mean, the 49ers, I think this is my opinion. I think the Cardinals are a team that people are not talking about enough. That team was scrappy late last year, and they've added a lot of pieces. That's just my opinion. And the Rams are still the Rams. I mean, they had a great draft. So, I mean, Rob and I've talked about this. I just feel like this division is going to be a gauntlet again.
Yeah, 100%.
Who you got?
Yeah, I 100% agree. I think that you have to start the conversation with the 49ers at the top. They're just the most physically talented team, but it also feels like they are a club that is getting older, I think the Brandon Ayuk thing is something that bears watching, and then the Rams, and unfortunately, have had Seattle's number, but, without Aaron Donald, who knows? As Corbin mentioned with Arizona, but I think that Seattle is the real wild card. I can envision a scenario that Seattle wins the whole damn division. I can envision a scenario where everything falls apart and they're, at the basement as well. So that to me makes this as exciting as of a build up to a season as I can remember here in the last several years of the Seahawks.
Well said, fellas. I'm worried about the Rams.
I understand. Yeah, the Rams are. Sean McVay does amazing things. When Raheem Morris moving on, to me, I think it's going to weaken that defense, as I just mentioned about Aaron Donald. But my goodness, I mean, they just draft guys. We had a question, a Mailbag Monday question just a couple of days ago that I completely fumbled, Lofa, that asked about a team that was on Seattle's schedule that I thought was going to be a more formidable opponent for them at this point. And to me, it's the Rams. I mean, they got Jared Verse, an edge rusher from Florida State, the defensive tackle from Florida State as well. And yeah, exactly.
Yep.
He's a stud, and I think they're just going to kind of bounce off of each other, and then, of course, the Michigan running back, Blake Corum, to me, is just exactly the type of guy that Sean McVay has, scored 2 or 3 or 4 touchdowns against the Seahawks week in and week out when he's had his opportunities. So the Rams are no joke as well. That's, again, what I think is going to make the NFC West the best division in football all over again.
I believe it. Yeah, the Rams, they scare me because of McVay, his masterful play calling. Puka Nacua, a year stronger. Yeah. Cooper Kupp actually healthy, for the full season. And yeah, I understand Aaron Donald, one of the greatest defensive players of all time, retiring, but they drafted I think it was a 3rd, a 5th, and a 7th. All of them had over 3 sacks. The 3rd, I think it was Young from Tennessee, or the guy from Tennessee had 8 or 9. The 5th rounder had 6, and Taylor or Lejean, the kid from Toledo, that's the one. Yeah. Man, I wanted the Hawks when I was helping out. I was like, yo, if we get this kid undrafted, steal. And they took him with Mr. Irrelevant pick. They took him with the very last pick, and I was like, okay, they know something. And then now you add Jared Verse and Braden Fisk to the mix. It's gonna be tough.
This just feels like a division. I mean, I'm going to be honest. I don't know that there's another division out there that I could say this about. It feels like any of the 4 teams, if everything falls right, could. And I include Arizona in there. I just think the Cardinals are there's something pesky about them. And Gannon's grown on me. I was not a fan of him as a head coach, but that team bought in last year. I mean, they were as competitive as anybody second half of the season. So it's going to be a lot of fun to see what happens. I know Seahawks fans are hoping that Seattle's going to be near the top, but I mean, that is going to be an absolute gauntlet of a division. As always, Lofa, greatly appreciate having you on, and we look forward to doing it again sometime.
Anytime, fellas. Love talking football. Stay blessed. I appreciate you.
Thanks, man. Thanks. Great seeing you. Take care.
When we come back, we are going to be checking out our 90-man countdown. We are going to be dipping into the 30s and got a couple rookies, a couple really fun young players that we're going to be looking at. We'll get to that up next here on our Wednesday edition of Locked On Seahawks. You're listening to the Locked On Seahawks podcast here, which is sponsored by our friends over at Game Time. If you're somebody that's wanting to buy a ticket to a big event, a sporting event, a concert, whatever, you shouldn't have to think about skipping a mortgage payment when you are buying that ticket, because Game Time is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater near you. They got killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their best price guarantee. Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. Back in early May, my wife and I scored awesome lower bowl seats to see the metal gods themselves, Judas Priest. we got to see Rob Halford and company for just $75 a ticket and enjoyed the chance to see the iconic band up close and personal without breaking the bank or breaking the law. Game Time has deals on tickets right after the day of the event, and the Game Time guarantee means you'll always get the best price to write your own memories. If you find tickets in the same section or row for less, Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download a Game Time app, create an account, and use the code Locked On for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem the code LOCKEDON for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. You're listening to the Wednesday edition of Locked On Seahawks. It's your host, Corbin Smith. Glad to be joined, as always, by my co-host in crime, Rob Rang, and a special thanks to our special guest, Lofa Tatupu, for coming on and sharing his knowledge about the linebacker position, basketball, and much more. A really fun guest to have here on the podcast. Let's get to our 90-man countdown, shall we? And we are now into the 30s, Rob, and we got some intriguing players on the list today. And we're going to start with the free agent edition at the receiver position, Laviska Shenault, who I know when he was coming out of Colorado, we used to have we covered that draft here on Locked On Seahawks. And I know he was a player that you were very high on, went in the second round of the Jaguars, had two promising seasons in Jacksonville, and then things have kind of fallen off the last 2 years in Carolina, but he's still only 25 years old, a big-bodied guy that can break tackles, ability to the catch, and he's also a really good special teams player. This feels like a spot where, without the pressure of being one of the top couple receivers, that maybe you can coax a little bit more production out of him on offense and special teams, and he can end up being a really solid one-year value for the Seahawks.
Yeah, to me, he is one of those guys that's got a high floor and an incredibly high ceiling. He's 6'1", 220 pounds. And as you said, Corbin, we just had the opportunity to talk ball with Lofa Tatupu, and we kind of started the conversation off about, interestingly enough, about another freakish big wide receiver in Brandon Marshall. And Laviska Shenault has not become Brandon Marshall or Terrell Owens or DK Metcalf or A.J. Brown or any of these other massive receivers with incredible speed, but he does have that physical ability to him. And so, as you said, for 25, turning 26-year-old wideout who might be able to provide something in the kick return aspect as well, I think that he's worth the roll of the dice. And so a very intriguing veteran that, again, I think if he finds a fit in Ryan Grubb's offense, and we talk so much about how Grubb's offense really is catered to versatile playmakers, then Laviska Shenault could be that kind of, low-key, so to speak, signing of the Seahawks offseason.
And this is filling the void that D. Eskridge has not been able to fulfill, that they thought he was going to as a second-round pick, that guy that you can run jet sweeps with. He's got, I believe, 30-something carries in his career. You can put him in the backfield, and he's a big-body running back. I see some Cordarrelle Patterson-type skills there that you can use him back at running back. Swinging over to the defensive side of the football, we just talked linebackers, and John Radigan's been a player who's been a little bit more on our radar coming off the offseason program, in large part because we haven't seen Dodson. We haven't seen Baker on the field at this point. Lofa seems to be really optimistic about those two players, and they could be back ready for the start of training camp, and hopefully that's the case. But it does feel like John Radigan has now positioned himself, at least for the start of the season, to be the player who would be the beneficiary if Dodson or Baker has a more prolonged recovery and maybe isn't ready for week one. We could see John Radigan out there against the Denver Broncos on September 8th.
We absolutely could. I think that you could make an argument that he should be a betting favorite at this point to play that role, just because, as Lofa said, it's not just about ability, it's about availability. And John Radigan has been available not only for the Seahawks, but of course for his country. And so all the more reason why I think that there are going to be some who are rooting for him within the Seahawks coaching staff as well as scouting staff. And sure, he doesn't have the physical measurables that are considered ideal at that spot. 6 foot, 236 pounds. Lofa himself was 6 foot, 238. They ran very similar 40-yard dash times, 4.77 for Radigan, 4.83 for Lofa Tatupu. But like Tatupu, Radigan just has an instinct, an awareness of the football. He's physical. He gets and he knocks people back at the point of contact rather than falling on his back and sacrificing those extra 2 or 3 yards. In this particular Mike McDonald defense, I think that Radigan actually has a better angle to meaningful playing time than he did in Pete Carroll. It's more of a fast-flowing kind of a defense. So I'm really intrigued by what John Radigan might be able to provide the Seahawks. I do think that Tyrel, Dodson, Jerome, Baker are your presumptive starters, and I'm certainly intrigued by Tyrice Knight as well. But Radigan, to me, feels like the safe guy that you can rely on if you need to.
Yeah, and he also is going to be the core special teams player now with Nick Ballore no longer being on the roster, Cody Barton leaving a couple years ago. That has fallen now to John Radigan. So at worst, he is going to be one of your core special teams guys, a special teams captain potentially. So he's going to have a big role there, and maybe he plays some on defense. Wrapping up this latest 90-man cluster here, the Seahawks surprised people when they drafted not one but 2 Auburn cornerbacks on day 3. In the draft, corner was not viewed as a position of need, especially after drafting Devin Witherspoon and Rick Woolen the 2 years before, and yet it's all about value, as our friend Jim Nagy, the Senior Bowl, said when he was on with us. You know, at that point on day 3, you're looking to get the best players you can get your hands on. And Nehemiah Pritchett in the 5th round, you're talking about a guy that ran in the 4.3s, legitimate 4.3 speed, has kick return experience, the new rules, maybe he plays into that. You saw improved ball production from him in his last year at Auburn. He's a willing tackler for being a kind of tall, lean corner. He'll come up and he'll play the run. He'll come up and he'll stick people, and he can play that press coverage. He's got the speed to recover. There's a lot to love about Nehemiah Pritchett's game.
There absolutely is. You mentioned just the height, weight, speed factor. I mean, 6 foot, 190 pounds, and he ran a 4.36 with a 1.49 10-yard dash time. Corbin, that was the 3rd fastest of anybody at the combine this year. And those guys were basically a 100th of a second faster than Nehemiah Pritchett. Considering just the fact that he had his success against, in Auburn in the SEC competition, he is not quite as polished, in my opinion, as DJ James, in the corner that Seattle selected, his former teammate at Auburn, a couple of picks later. But I see the higher upside with Pritchett. To me, he is a little bit more of a developmental guy. But the similar reasons why I was so excited about Tariq Woolen when the Seahawks selected him a couple of years ago out of UT San Antonio, obviously a much lower level of competition, but you saw the physical traits that with a little bit of coaching, you thought might be able to make this player into an absolute stud in the NFL. The same kind of thing here with Nehemiah Pritchett. You know that the way that the Baltimore Ravens during McDonald's tenure there were able to develop young players and really take advantage of their talent, I think that the Seahawks should be able to do the same thing with Pritchett.
And the other thing that's noteworthy here, Mike Jackson, Trey Brown are both going to be free agents after this year. Yeah. So you have to look into the draft, not just for the upcoming season. You got to have an eye on 2 and 3 years down the road. So Pritchett may have a chance to compete for snaps as early as 2025, especially with Devin Witherspoon playing a lot of his snaps inside in the slot. So you have to look at it from that vantage point that you have this year to develop him. Maybe he just plays special teams, maybe some sub-package stuff with him in there, but this is a year to develop him so that, hey, hopefully in 2025, hey, this guy's got elite speed. There's a lot of traits we like. If we can develop his football skills, maybe he can end up being a starter for us down the road, at minimum being a guy that is capable of starting in the secondary. As always, you can follow me on X and Threads at Corbin Smith NFL. You can follow Rob at Rob Rang. Make sure to subscribe to Locked On Seahawks on YouTube and wherever you listen to your podcast to make sure you don't miss a single episode. Coming up tomorrow, it may be the 4th of July, but we're still going to have some fireworks here from a fantasy perspective. Make sure to join in. That show will be coming early in the morning before everybody goes out and enjoys the holiday. So make sure that you're listening in. Again, a fantasy-oriented, a lot of fireworks show on 4th of July. Make sure you're listening in and enjoy the rest of your Wednesday. Go Hawks.